thing about live is you tend to sell much more volume. The stat that we've most recently looked at is you tend to sell 4 to 4.5 times what you would typically sell in a static environment in a live environment. You can show one product. If you've got 100, 200, 1,000 people sitting in that live, imagine having that many people in a retail store, but focused on one product at a time and someone talking about it. And I think that leads to volume.
You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Hello and welcome to Retail Disrupted. Now, if you're a regular listener, you might have spotted a theme over the past few episodes. As much as I love speaking to retailers on this podcast, I also love hearing from the disruptors. These are the businesses that are rewriting the rules, rejecting the status quo, and reimagining the way that shoppers connect with brands. So today, we are very much continuing with this theme. I am thrilled to have Daniel Fisher joining me on the show. Daniel is the head of categories in Europe at Whatnot, the largest live stream shopping platform in the UK, Europe, and North America. If you're not familiar with Whatnot, that's okay. You will be by the end of this episode. Whatnot's own CEO has described the company as the biggest business you've never heard of. Every week, 340,000 hours of live content is watched on Whatnot. The business has been valued at $5 billion, and in the US, it is the second most downloaded iPhone app in the shopping category, just after Temu, and ahead of the big retail giants like Amazon and Walmart. So, Daniel, welcome to the show. I am really looking forward to hearing all about Whatnot and the rise of live shopping. Tell us a little bit more about it and why we haven't heard about it until now.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've been avidly listening. Very, very happy to get a chance to chat. It's a great question. Yeah, I can give some background, but I think it's a fair description. Even the scale of Whatnot, I think, surprised me when I came into the business. And actually, to your point about kind of ranking on the App Store, I checked this morning. We're the 4th ranked free shopping app in the App Store in the UK, and the rest of that list is Tesco's and Boots, etc. So yeah, pretty surprising to some people unless you're sort of shopping in our category. So Whatnot, founded in 2019, very end of 2019, so a very, very young business. And has quickly become the largest live shopping app in the US and Europe, as you mentioned. And actually, Whatnot's the fastest growing marketplace ever in the US. And that includes other marketplace businesses like Airbnb and Uber. And essentially what Whatnot does is we enable shoppers, buyers to interact with sellers and other buyers live from their phones and buy instantly. And it enables sellers or retailers to create digital shops, go live and sell either from their premises, their warehouses, even from their homes, depending on the type of seller, via a bunch of different formats that we've got. And I think the core is it really brings that kind of in-store shopping experience to your phone, to that online, to that online experience. And maybe the reason some people still haven't heard of us, although I don't think it'll be long, is we're extremely community driven. So Whatnot really focuses on passion areas and passion categories. So whether we started in collectibles, we have a very, very large collectibles business. That's anything from, trading cards, Pokemon cards, sports cards, even Lego, things like that, comics, etc. But has quickly moved into areas like fashion, sneakers and streetwear, and in the US, even live plants. So
live
because
plants,
we focus, yeah, exactly. I'm looking forward to that coming to the UK. People
me
selling
as well.
to greenhouses, yeah. So because I think we focus on those very, very core areas and we tend to advertise in those very core areas, we haven't done that kind of mass market above the line advertising thing. So you won't see us on buses and billboards yet, but we're very deep in those categories. And as you said, very engaging, 340,000 hours. I think you said, mentioned lives watched every week. And I've heard this theme come up a lot on your previous podcast, but essentially this is an entertainment and shopping format that's mixed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that sweet spot of entertainment, shopping, and community, to your earlier point. I'd like to ask you about the categories that you play in. So you just touched on how you started out in collectibles, but from the sense that I get is that you're now on this mission to diversify into new categories. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey and which categories you're most excited about for the future?
Sure. So, mentioned we started in collectibles, but quickly sort of diversified into a number of other categories. Fashion's our fastest growing category across the business, and that's obviously a big catch-all. But men's fashion, women's fashion, sneakers and streetwear, bags, accessories are a very, very big growth area for us. And then I would say beauty, perhaps unsurprisingly, is one of our fastest growing, and very excited about that as a category as a whole. But we're also exploring many other different types of categories. So sports equipment and golf clubs, for example, is an area that's growing very, very quickly for us. I think the list is sort of endless, and live lends itself very well to a lot of these categories because it's very tactile, right? You can see the person you're buying from. You've got a maven selling to you that's an expert in their category. And you can see the product, which really helps.
Yeah. And I guess you're marrying up the best of both worlds, aren't you? Because when we shop online, it tends to be because of the convenience and the ease that we get by that experience. Whereas when we go into a store, oftentimes, we may want that additional service, that expertise that, arguably only perhaps a human equipped with some technology, but an experience that a human can give. So I think, that I think live shopping and social commerce, or discovery commerce, as we're often referring to it, I think that really hits a sweet spot by marrying up the convenience of online shopping and the discovery aspect that you would traditionally get in store.
Yeah, and there is something inherent in shopping with your friends. And I use the term friends because, I know for a fact, because I've met a lot of a number of our sellers and buyers through events, etc. And I speak to users all the time. People build real bonds on the app because they're converging around this thing that they love. So there's something about seeing the same people in the shows week in, week out, and watching your friends interact and shop. There's something very social about that. And that kind of brings back that going to the mall with your friends as a teenager or whatever it might have been. There's something nostalgic about that, I think.
Yeah. And do you think that's what's fueling this huge boom that we're seeing in live shopping? Because I think the direction of travel is that, e-commerce is going to become a lot more dynamic, more immersive. I think when we shop online even in the next sort of 3 to 5 years, I think it's going to look very different, not just because of live shopping and social commerce, although that plays a huge role, but also we've got, agentic AI coming in and, again, reinventing the experience. We've got augmented reality and virtual try-ons. There's a whole host of things happening. And I think, as an analyst, it's interesting to see all these moving parts and what it means for us as shoppers. But just to hone in on live shopping, what's really driving this growth here?
Yeah, I mean, we've done some sort of surveys on why people do this, and the social element I think is quite a big part of that actually. And 1 in 10 of our sellers are now full time selling on Whatnot, and I think there's a reason for that. I'm not a psychologist clearly, but I think post COVID. People were kind of yearning for this return to social, return to the high street. And it's no secret that the high street in particular has been under a lot of pressure, particularly small shops, but not just small shops, bigger retailers too. And I don't know, at least in my experience, there's something that's become quite sterile about that broad online experience. You buy the thing, you probably fill your basket with 30 different sizes of it. Not very efficient, gets delivered, you return it, most of it. So there's something about that kind of deeper understanding of the product and talking to the person selling it, that I think makes that transaction just much more appealing and much more engaging. And we're seeing that in some of the research that we've done as to, I can't remember the exact stat off the top of my head, but a big chunk of our sellers are there because there's this social element to what they're doing, and it retains buyers better than your typical sort of transaction online.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about your sellers, because I would imagine that your sellers need to almost be performers as much as they need to be merchants, because in this era, if content isn't engaging, we're just going to quickly swipe away. So can you tell us a little bit more about that hybrid creator retailer model, and what makes the best sellers stand out?
Sure. So actually, I think there's one misconception sometimes about Whatnot, that it's all influencers selling on the platform, and it actually couldn't be further from the truth. I think about one of the first sellers that I personally onboarded, who was a sports card seller, a guy called Adam. His username is Yorkshire Collector. He sells sports cards. He was a full-time pharmacist when I first spoke to him, and he was selling sports cards on Instagram, sort of on the side. He now employs 5 people, has a multi-million-pound business on Whatnot, and yes, he's entertaining. But I think the key thing about him as a kind of representation of a lot of our other sellers, or even retailers that come on, is they're just real experts in the product. So people you don't have to have all the bells and whistles necessarily. The production value doesn't even necessarily have to be massively high. It helps if it looks relatively slick. But actually, we find that studio environments don't look great on live. People want something more authentic. And it's really about being an expert in the category. And really knowing about the thing that you're selling. So I would say the 2 core things are be passionate about the thing that you're selling, and that really comes through. You don't have to be a TV presenter, and use the data to focus on the products that people want. So we supply a lot of data as to what's selling. We have a rewards club program, which helps you essentially build like an airline rewards club for your buyers, so you can see who your top buyers are, what they're buying, and you can tailor your shows around those things. And I think those 2 things are the things that are core. You don't necessarily have to be, a trained actor or actress to make this work.
Yeah, it's that authenticity that's so important. And
exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do they sell on other platforms, or do they tend to be exclusive to your platform? Like, how does that work?
I think it's a real mix. As I mentioned, 1 in 10 in Europe are now selling full time on Whatnot, and over 50% of those now have teams of 6 or more people dedicated just to live shopping in Europe. In the US, that stat, we've been around in the US for a bit longer, so it's even more. Quarter of those sellers are making over £50,000 a month, and obviously the top sellers are making a lot more than that. So I think people are moving more and more over to this as a single point. But yes, a lot of these sellers will also have their own websites, etc., and be selling directly. I think the thing about live is you tend to sell much more volume. So you tend to sell sort of, I think the stat that we've most recently looked at is you tend to sell 4 to 4.5 times what you would typically sell in a static environment in a live environment, and that it lends itself very well to that.
Yeah, and is that because it's sort of designed to drive those impulse purchases? That kind of like, this is available for a certain amount of time, or sort of what drives that?
I think it gives sellers an opportunity through formats like flash sales to have the immediacy of a sale in a shorter amount of time. But actually, I think it's just about the amount of volume that you can sell at one time. So you can show one SKU, you can show one product, but have 1,000 of that product sitting behind it. And if you've got, 100, 200, 1,000 people sitting in that live, imagine having that many people in a retail store, but focused on one product at a time and someone talking about it. And I think that leads to volume.
Yeah, that's the dream, isn't it? That's the holy grail, to have that kind of captive audience. I mean, that's really interesting. So let's just talk a little bit more about your customers. Who you mentioned that there was this misconception on the seller side about everyone being influencers, and that's not the case. Well, I think generally speaking, there's this misconception when it comes to social commerce and live shopping that it's all Gen Z shoppers, it's all the younger generation that are using these kinds of platforms. I'd love to know if that's the case for you. Is that a misconception? Who are your core customers? And also, has that evolved as you've moved into new categories?
It's absolutely evolved and definitely a misconception, I think, and something that surprised me quite a lot. I'm a bit of an outsider to e-commerce, actually. So I look at this very much as a consumer or an ex-small business owner. And what we tend to see is, so anything with high nostalgia value, so collectibles, for example, the audience tends to skew millennial because they're essentially buying items that they coveted as kids that they couldn't afford to buy, or their parents didn't buy them or couldn't buy them. And now they've got disposable income and there's excitement around those products. When you look at fashion categories, for example, sneakers and streetwear tends to skew younger and then into millennial. But we have categories, for example, like coins, precious metals, tend to skew much older. I think the average age, probably skews over 50 for those categories. So it's a real broad mix, and has diversified significantly as we've opened up these new categories. But yeah, it's a broad range.
That's so interesting. And I think when we talk about live shopping, I think a lot of people immediately think of Asia, which is, Asia seems to be leading the way when it comes to live shopping. They've been doing it for a very long time, especially if you look at markets like China or South Korea. I just wonder, why do you think it's taken off so strongly there? And do you think eventually we'll see the same sort of adoption in other parts of the world, here in the UK, Europe, or maybe North America?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Asia, particularly China and some Southeast Asian countries, were the kind of forerunner in live. And live as a whole, you'll see lots of different stats. I'm sure you know them better than me, but estimated to be something like $120 billion market already globally, and a lot of that's China, unsurprisingly, although growing very rapidly in the US and Europe. And that, that's estimated to be like last stat I saw was a $2 trillion market by 2030 globally. And I'm sure a lot of that will still be Asia. I think when you look at the Asian apps, and I'm definitely no expert, but when you look at the consumer behavior is very different just because of the way that people use payments. It's set up in a completely different way. And actually the apps tend to be heavily gamified. I've even seen now that in China, and it probably isn't a surprise, but some stores are running 24-hour shows. Some of those hosts are already AI-generated hosts. Really very different.
Wow.
I think.
Are we ready for that? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure we're ready for that. I think what Whatnot's done really well is it took that sort of that idea and that experience, but it really adapted it for a Western audience. And I think you tend to find the UI on Whatnot's much cleaner. There's not a lot. I think Western consumers as a whole probably find it harder to adapt to a lot going on a screen at one time. And I think it's done that really well. And that's probably the way that it will develop. But if you look at the growth, Whatnot did something like $3 billion worth of transaction values last year. We're on to double that or more this year, so 6 billion or more this year. And European seller growth being roughly 600% year-on-year growth in sellers. So actually the trajectory is very similar to Asia. We're just a few years behind. So, I think McKinsey said it will be 20% of live will be 20% of e-commerce even by next year, which isn't a massive surprise to me when you look at how fast it's moving. So I'm biased, but I see this as a step change in how people are going to shop online.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so fascinating as an analyst to watch it all play out. Just the proliferation of touch points that we have as consumers, and especially online. So we've seen the proliferation in the physical space with so many different ways to shop. But when it comes to online, it was kind of static for a really long time. But now you've got everyone's doing marketplaces. Direct to consumer has evolved. We've seen entirely new propositions pop up like Temu and Shein. We've got quick commerce, social commerce, of course, and then live shopping, which is sort of an extension, I suppose, of social commerce. I'm not sure. Would you agree with that? That live shopping is an extension of social commerce? Just sort of thinking out loud. I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, I think it's an evolution of what's gone before, because essentially live, it takes what we were already doing, which is this human element as part of shopping and people interacting online, and it merges those two worlds. I think the entertainment element is really interesting. I think our average watch time is something like 80 minutes a day. I think Netflix is something like 200 minutes a day, and that's a long form content platform. So people aren't there just to shop. They're also there to experience something. But yeah, I would say it's an evolution of e-commerce, and there's something quite fundamental about that. One thing that I think about sometimes is, in some ways, it's doing for e-commerce what YouTube did for entertainment, in that it's sort of there's a couple of reasons I say that. Number one, it lowered the barriers for people to build entertainment platforms. So you didn't need super sophisticated production facilities. Similarly, in live shopping now, you don't need necessarily a high street shop. You don't need someone to do all of the logistics, because Whatnot does all of that for you. And actually, interestingly, when YouTube sort of kicked off, you had these creators start and basically build media companies, and then very quickly bigger brands understood that they needed to be in that space too, and that's how the market evolved. And now it's it's an incumbent part of our entertainment ecosystem, and that's sometimes how I look at live. It's democratized the ability for people to build very large e-commerce businesses.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. And I guess as a follow-up to that, you mentioned earlier that people are spending a significant amount of time watching this content on your platform, but how does it work? So do shoppers log on because they follow a certain seller and they know they're going to go live, or are they maybe cooking dinner and they just think, oh, let's just see what shows are on? Like, do they? I guess my question is, do they discover products there, or do they kind of go in with intent to watch a specific seller, or maybe it's a mix of both?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I think what's quite unique about Whatnot is that people are there to shop, right? People are there to sell or buy. So it's sort of shopping first, entertainment as a subsidiary of that. So generally speaking, they're going on the app. There's two ways they'll discover what's going on. They're following a category or multiple categories, and they'll be served in the feed shows that are appropriate from that category, and the algorithm learns what you like, etc., and will serve you appropriate programming and shows. So that's one way. The other way is people follow particular sellers and can also bookmark shows. So they'll know when that seller's going live. And also a lot of our sellers will go live at the same time every week and do thematic shows on that day of the week. So they'll do their Friday show or their Monday show. And it's almost like an appointment to watch. I've heard sellers say to me before that buyers have told them, we watch EastEnders or whatever it is, and then we'll go and watch your show. So it's kind of this appointment to watch element.
So it gets built into their routine or their schedule.
Yeah, and then they'll get notified on the app if they've selected to get notified about that show going live, and it will tell them there, and then they pop up in the show and they'll be in that audience. Yeah.
Oh, cool. It's so interesting. I have to admit that it's still the live shopping is, I mean, I'm learning a lot from this conversation. So thank you. I'm sure our listeners are as well. But yeah, I feel like I have a lot of genuine questions for you because it's just such a rapidly evolving space and there's so much happening and just really interesting to see again how it plays into the whole evolution of e-commerce. Now, there will be a lot of retailers and brands listening in, probably feeling pretty inspired and wondering how they can also create online experiences that are both seamless and entertaining. And I wonder, what advice do you have for maybe some of those bigger legacy businesses? I know a lot of retailers, especially during the pandemic, tried to do live shopping on their own platforms, some with more success than others. And I don't know, do you see the way, do you kind of feel that we're landing in a space where those retailers and brands should be looking to Whatnot and other platforms, or what would you recommend to them?
Yeah, so live's very accessible actually, and we see more and more large retailers coming onto the platform, and actually we see a couple, already. I've got a couple of there's in the US, for example, there's a watch brand called Invicta. It's been around for a long time. They do sort of fashion watches, Esterbrook pens, big pen brand in the US. And essentially, what we've seen very quickly is they've moved a very large chunk of their business onto live and onto Whatnot because of the pace at which they can basically move through product and sell. I think I understand it can be a little bit daunting for retailers, but the thing is, retailers have everything they need to set this up because they have the people. They've probably got a social media team. You don't necessarily need that. You might just need someone in the warehouse. They have space. They have warehouse space. They have shops, which is a great backdrop, by the way, for live experience. Works really well. And I would say the key things are start with a particular product line, something that you're well known for. Be consistent. I think sometimes what you see is people sort of dabbling without a plan, and obviously we can help people come up with plans there, but have some consistency because essentially consumers want to see that you're consistently live, and that doesn't have to be every day, but some level of consistency. And then experiment with formats. So we have lots and lots of different formats, from buy it nows to flash sales to auctions. And depending on the product range and price point, you can experiment with those formats. But I think actually the most important thing is just stay authentic. Actually having someone in your business who knows your business, even someone on your shop floor or someone who's interested in this in your business, who knows your products, is the fastest route to success. You don't need to hire a specialized host. You don't need a studio.
No actors.
No actors. What we find actually is that authenticity and passion for product is the best way to do this. And it is as simple as, you could set up a live stream and be set up with us, provided you're approved. You can be set up within 10 minutes and someone from the team can help you get set up. So
I thought you were going to say 10 days.
No, it's very quick.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So just to wrap up, I'd love to get your thoughts on where you see live shopping going next. I mean, we just talked about how in China there are AI generated hosts. Maybe we're not quite ready for that, but how do you see it evolving, and do you see it becoming a mainstream retail channel in the future?
Yeah, so I think the growth that we're seeing both in the US and in the UK and Europe as a whole is a real indication of where it's going and where it's not really slowing down. So as I mentioned, 1 in 10 sellers selling full time on the app. We're seeing that number rise very rapidly. One of the stats I look at regularly is how many of our sellers are making over a threshold every month to determine how many people are making very significant revenue streams here. I also mentioned, how many jobs it's creating, which I think is a great forward-looking indicator. So over 50% of sellers have 6-person teams or more focusing just on live. And we now have hundreds of sellers making over $1 million dollars a year of revenue on the app, and that's rising rapidly. And I think when we did this survey recently, this sort of future state of live shopping, 94% of our sellers already see as live as crucial to the future of their businesses. So I think all of those things combined and just the macro sort of growth in the market indicates, number one, it's not slowing down, it's not going anywhere, but it's becoming a much larger part of that retail mix and online commerce mix. And yeah, even the cross-border element, I think we're seeing a 40% increase in cross-border sales across Europe, really indicates that it's catching on very, very fast across these categories.
Fantastic. Daniel, it's been really fascinating, genuinely fascinating hearing all about live shopping. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.